Hi, my name is Farhan and I'm here to bring a new type of video series called Thoughts On. Not really reviews or character analysis where I try to be more objective, but rather just ramblings on whatever the subject is in regards to my history of it, how I got into it, as well as what I like and dislike about it, giving criticism and praise. So it's rather subjective here. And as you can tell by the title of the video, here I'm going to be talking about the new / legacy characters that Marvel has been introducing within this decade. Also to note that these are going to be in parts because I don't want to make one long ass video talking about every single character, but give enough time for each of them. And also because I haven't read every single one of them so far as of this recording, as I do want to give a solid opinion on each of them. So the more I've read, the more parts I'll make on this. With that being said, let's get started with Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man. So I want to start with Miles because he seems to be the character that kickstarted this renaissance, I suppose, of the new diverse legacy characters for Marvel back in 2011, which if you don't know what a legacy character is, it's basically a superhero alias that has been assumed by multiple characters. So most notable examples will be the Robins and the Flashes, where multiple characters have taken the identity. And I really do dig the concept of legacy characters. It not only helps for character development, but offer different characters to be that hero. So if you didn't like this character as a hero, maybe this other one will appeal to you more and suit your taste better. Anyway, with Miles Morales, I first heard of him, I want to say like a few years ago if I remember correctly, and I think it was either surfing through Marvel Wiki or through YouTubers such as Danny D's World and Neo GameSpot, who were definitely not fond of the character. Mainly because in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, Peter Parker died so that Miles Morales can be introduced as the new Spider-Man, and from what I see, they're gonna forever hate on Miles, primarily because, wah, Peter died. Anyway, from what I gather as far as people's reception of him as of now is that he is one of the more liked new legacy characters, but obviously there are also people that hate him, mainly because Peter was killed off to introduce him, and also the stupid asinine anti-SJW bandwagon for Marvel nowadays. Anyway, at the time I didn't know too much about his character outside of him being a new Black Spider-Man that got introduced after Peter died in the Ultimate comics, so I didn't really have an actual opinion on the character. He's not the first new legacy character I've read. That would be Kamala, who is the current Miss Marvel, but I'll get into that later. I'd say he's probably the second one I've read if I remember correctly. The main reason I want to read his comics is because, as I mentioned earlier, there's the dumbass anti-SJW bandwagon, which, as you can tell, I'm definitely not fond of, as they pretty much hate on any of the new characters that Marvel introduces, primarily for arbitrary, stupid, superficial, petty crap, and claim that it's SJW propaganda. And I thought that since Miss Marvel was of really good quality and I disagree with their hate on her, it may be the same case for the other characters. And thus I started reading Miles' comics early in 2017, around March I want to say. And keep in mind, I didn't really read Peter Parker's stuff with the Ultimate Spider-Man comics prior to reading Miles' run. I mean, technically I did, but it was only the Death of Spider-Man story arc I've read in like 2014. So I read Miles' entire run before I read Peter's, although in retrospect I do wish I read Peter's run before Miles's. Because after reading Peter's run, Miles' stuff felt more impactful to me. I mean, you can read it without Peter's stuff, but the experience is better after reading Peter's run. So what I like about Miles' character is how the book dealt with him taking on the mantle after Peter's death. At first he didn't really want the powers before Peter died, although he had potential as a hero, but after Peter's death he felt the need to continue the legacy Peter left behind. Also, I like the dynamics with his family, like with his uncle Aaron Davis, who is the Prowler, which I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw his costume I was like, this man looking like some purple ass Deadpool. As far as his relationship goes, I liked how Aaron was trying to be cool with Miles even though his father didn't approve of him, concerning their criminal history, and things get more dicey once his uncle knew about Miles being Spider-Man. There was also the fact that Miles' father, Jefferson Davis, was not really fond of superheroes either, so he tried keeping it secret, but when he found out, it was good development for both of them overall. His mother, Rio Morales, is definitely hot, I ain't gonna lie about that. And later when she died, it did the Spider-Man No More storyline, which was also really good. Although I thought a year hiatus was maybe a bit too long, but he was like 13 years old at the time and different people react to things differently, so it's whatever. And I like seeing how Miles pondered how things would have been if Peter was still alive. Now I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but apparently I heard that Bendis said in an interview that the reason he made Miles Spider-Man was because he thought that black people couldn't relate to Peter Parker because he wasn't black himself, which I definitely disagree with, assuming that it's actually true, of course. Nor do I necessarily agree with killing Peter off to introduce Miles. I mean, my thing with it is that, yeah, it sucks to see Peter go, and I do prefer Peter over Miles, but I don't mind that he died since he went out like a G, nor do I think it's objectively bad from a writing or storytelling standpoint. I just think that it wasn't necessary to kill Peter off to introduce him, but it is what it is, and I don't hate Miles over it since it was the writer's decision to do so, and I still wanted to give him a fair chance. And like I said, I really like how people reacted to him continuing the mantle, as people thought that was in poor taste of him being Spidey after Peter died. Also, the interactions with Jessica Drew / Spider-Man or Spider-Woman, who in the Ultimate Comics was a female clone of Peter Parker, so kind of like X-23 I suppose. Also forgot to mention Genki Lee, Miles' best friend. He's cool being the comedic best friend, but he isn't as good of a friend / supporting character as Bruno Corelli, at least in my opinion anyway. Also, I'm not really sure how you're supposed to pronounce his name. Is it Genki, Gank, Gunk? Or what? I don't know. Overall, I thought Miles' run in the Ultimate Comics was really good, and Spider-Man was also a really good crossover comic, seeing the 616 Peter interact with Miles. Only problems with it is Peter coming back alive, which I don't remember being properly explained, although I think it was implied that him and Norman had a great healing factor so they don't die easily. I also want to talk about his run within the 616, or the main Marvel universe, which I'm all for him being in the main universe, interacting with all the other characters and such. However, it's been quite disappointing as Bendis hasn't really been too many interesting stuff with Miles' character, which is a shame because there's definitely potential here. I don't know if it's because he's been working on multiple projects and he's kind of focusing his creative juices on the other titles and is just kind of dancing around with Miles without that much direction with the story. I don't know. Hopefully he can get better and Miles can be back on track. Him beating Blackheart I don't mind too much because he spammed the Venom Blast, which I think those were cool additional powers. Yeah, it's a stretch, but from what I tried looking up of Blackheart, he doesn't seem to have that kind of resistance to that attack. I like what we see of his interactions with Miss Marvel, would like to see more of it. His grandmother was a nice dramatic piece. I also think that Bendis was trying to take a shot at SJWs because there's this girl whose name escapes me at the moment. Anyway, she was raving about how this new Spider-Man was black, and Miles said that he doesn't want to be known as the Black Spider-Man, just Spider-Man. So there are some cool things here and there, but overall it hasn't been that interesting. Like the thing with Black Cat, there's not much progression with her stuff being an antagonist in the book, at least within the 20 issues are out as of this recording. The romance between Miles and Spider-Gwen felt really forced. Maybe I might change my mind on it once I read Spider-Gwen's comic, which I've heard were also really good if it delves into that relationship more. Although personally, if I were to pick a hero to hook him up with, my pick would be Miss Marvel, since they seem to have nice chemistry from what we see. Or with Bombshell Lana Baumgartner, if I pronounced her second name right, as they also got good chemistry. Oh yeah, and I also forgot to mention Sarah Pichelli's art is great in Miles' books in general. And I do wish that Miles' comics in 616, while it's not bad, it's not great either, so hopefully it gets back on track. Other things I forgot to mention is that I think his costume is pretty cool, although I do kind of wish that the sole under his feet were red to kind of match the color scheme of his hands, I suppose. I don't think it's as good as Peter's costume because to me it's kind of one of those cases where you can't beat the classics. Spider-Man 2 I think is a storyline I feel is too late to do figuring out who the 616 version of Miles Morales is because Miles now lives in the main Marvel universe, so does it really matter anymore? I guess we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Speaking of which, one of the things that bothers me is that it's very ambiguous as to whether or not he knows he's from the Ultimate Universe, so I hope that gets addressed. Another important thing I want to mention is now that Miles Morales is in the main Marvel universe, now they got a younger teenage Spider-Man that can relate to that audience, so they don't necessarily have to try forcing Peter Parker to be like that and allow him to grow properly as he should, which is kind of why they split up Peter and MJ with One More Day in the first place. So yeah, that's kind of my main thoughts on Miles Morales. Now let's talk about Kamala Khan, aka the current Miss Marvel. I've already reviewed her first omnibus and gushed about it, albeit with bad mic quality. Oh my god, it was so fucking bad. And with some spotty editing as well. So I don't want to repeat myself too much here, although knowing me I'll probably end up doing it anyway. As far as how I first became aware of her and got into her comics, I can't remember specifically when I first became aware of her. I think it was maybe for a YouTube video or something, but earlier in 2016 I do recall looking her up a bit on Marvel Wiki. So I was somewhat aware of her existence, but I hardly knew a thing about her outside of, oh, Marvel is a Muslim superhero, that's cool I guess. And the thing is that since Marvel does have a negative stigma attached to them in regards to how they handle their diversity, like I mentioned with the anti-SJW bandwagon earlier, I remember seeing a video from Neil Gainsparks in regards to diversity in comics earlier in 2016, since he believes that Marvel doesn't do a great job of it. I thought that while I don't have a solid opinion on how they handle the diversity in their comics at the time, but I at the very least thought that they probably don't do the best job of it. Although right now, having delved into those comics more myself, I'd highly disagree. Ironically speaking, as much as he criticizes Marvel for how they handle their diversity, I can tell that he clearly doesn't read the comics he's criticizing featuring those diverse characters. I mean, I won't say it's perfect, as nothing is, but it's nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. But anyway, how I got into it was that in the summer of 2016, me and my relatives were on holiday to America in Florida, Orlando, primarily because a relative of mine over there was getting married and we decided to attend their wedding. So during our time there, we obviously toured around and we went to Universal Studios, which the rides there were really good, but man, the lines were long as fuck. Anyway, there was a Marvel superheroes section and they had a store where they sell merchandises and even some comics. So in the store I saw the first issue, I think, or was it the first volume? I can't remember. Basically, I read the first issue over there, but anyway, going into it, considering the negative stigma for Marvel's diversity, which I was kind of going along with, thinking that they probably don't do the best job of it. I was thinking that she may be a stereotype wearing a hijab or something. However, I'm not really a person that tends to jump on bandwagons, nor am I fond of anti-SJW since they're essentially starting to become as bad as people they claim to be against. So I was definitely willing to give it a fair chance rather than go into it with a proper negative mindset. And boy was I surprised after reading the first issue. I was like, alright, not bad. And thought that was quite interesting, and it wasn't anywhere near as bad as people will have you believe. And from then on I continued reading her comics and ended up really liking the character, because she is nowhere near the stereotype that I initially thought she may have been, but I was just surprised with how relatable she was. Like, if you ask me which superhero or even fictional character for that matter I can relate to the most, it'd probably be Kamala Khan. Like, outside of the superhero stuff, I can definitely see her being a person in real life, as I can relate to her with a lot of things, with not necessarily just being Muslim and coming from a South Asian heritage. And I'm not trying to say that I necessarily need a character to be from the same cultural background, skin color and such to be able to relate to them. But from a personality standpoint, I can relate to her with the nerdy hobbies, being quite introverted at school but having fun banter with close friends, Asian parents, embracing both cultures, dealing with life, etc. I remember a quote from her saying that when she's at home she feels too Pakistani, but in her family's country she feels too American, which I was like, oh my god, that's so true. Which I can relate to that going to India before on holiday. Spider-Man was the OG relatable hero, which is what drew many of us to Peter Parker, because he was also a nerd, albeit the more traditional type, being very smart but not popular, dealing with life, etc. I feel that Kamala is basically this generation's Peter Parker / Spider-Man. I also really appreciate just how well written and well done both her character and comics were. My thing is that maybe when I was younger I may have had the thought of, oh, it would be really cool to have a Muslim superhero, but I was never really begging for it because I was fine with the heroes I've always known. But I'm open to having any new diverse heroes, whether they're legacy characters or their own hero, it doesn't really matter to me. As long as they're interesting and done well to my satisfaction, then it's all good. And I think it's really cool to have a superhero like Kamala Khan. I also really appreciate that while Islam is a part of her character, it's never really been the main focal point of her comics. The art was really fitting for a character with how quirky it can be. I like Bruno as a friend / supporting character, which, like I said in my review, it really shows just how great their friendship is. And similarly enough, I also have a close friend who's also from a foreign heritage, which we also have fun banter with each other. They're Christian, although not Catholic like Bruno. He's also more intelligent when it comes to school, known each other since we were kids, etc. Nakia, I thought she could have been utilized more, but anyway, I could kind of relate her to my other best friend who is more religious than I am, has a bit more of a serious personality, I guess, like how Nakia prefers wearing a hijab all the time. So does my friend who also prefers wearing a dopey all the time, and also known each other since childhood. Zoe Zimmer, I could kind of relate to my white friend. I don't mean to sound racist like that. Anyway, assuming Kamala met her in her teenage years, I also met my friend in my teenage years, but quite similarly, we kind of found each other annoying, or at least I did, similar to how Kamala found Zoe annoying at first, but then later on we became good friends. Now, he's not bisexual or homosexual like Zoe is, or anything like that. Obviously, it's not 100%, but still, she's a character I can relate to the most. And from what I see of people's reception of her is that, like similar to Miles, I think there are more people that like her, but of course there's a group of people that dislike her. Since I've already talked about her first omnibus, basically her run in 2014 to Secret Wars, but I've yet to talk about her 2016 run post Secret Wars. So let's talk about that. So when it started, it did establish that she was part of the Avengers now, which to quickly talk about only all different Avengers, I thought it was an alright / decent run, but I thought her character there wasn't as interesting as she was in her own comics. I don't know, she felt kind of more generic. Anyway, back to her 2016 run, I really liked the progression for the characters like Kamala, Bruno, Zoe, etc. Even though Civil War 2 was not a good event, but I do like her tie-in issues, which were honestly some of the best things about that event, with how it affected the relationship between Kamala and Carol, where she was initially siding with Carol due to how great her perspective of stopping crimes before they occur. But then she learned how flawed it was and how it was affecting Carol, thus becoming disillusioned to her favorite hero, as it showed that not everything is what it seems, nor does things turn out as you would like, which is kind of like how life works. With Bruno, I liked how he moved on from not being able to be in a romantic relationship with Kamala, so he found someone else with Michaela, or Mike for short, as she is called, which Kamala was quite jealous of initially, but then they end up becoming friends. Then what the Civil War 2 stuff led into with what happened to Bruno, not only did he damage his left arm, his dominant hand, but also negatively affected their friendship, which made him want to part ways with Kamala, since he felt that Kamala is rather selfish, wanting things to roll her way and have whatever is convenient for her, no matter what good she tries to do, regardless of how it affects those around her. Man, it sucked to see them part ways, especially since they had such a good friendship, and I do wish that they can make up again in the future. And it's cool to see what Bruno was doing in the Wakandan University or whatever, and he doesn't hate Kamala but doesn't want to be involved with her anymore. However, it was nice to see him help out against Doc X for this one occasion. Speaking of Doc X, I thought he was cool, and initially I was speculating that maybe Nox behind it, although Doc X's actual origins was kind of meh, since it was some random dude making some virus and it grew from there. Zoe went in an interesting direction, as it brings the homosexuality aspect to her character, and I thought that it was handled rather well. It didn't feel too forced because, like with teenagers, it's around that period where puberty hormones kicks in. She was trying to put up a front initially to keep herself within societal norms, but as she stopped doing that, being friends with Kamala, she eventually discovers her sexuality, and just like in real life, some discover it sooner or later than others. The new villains, just like in her previous runs, are serviceable but could use a bit more depth. I could see them being reoccurring villains, especially Lockdown, Josh with him being Discord maybe. I probably should talk about some of the politics involved in the comics, as people nowadays seem to dislike having any sort of political or topical stuff in comics, especially with Marvel. To me, I honestly don't care if a comic gets political or topical, since comics have always been like that, and I'm pretty apolitical, so it doesn't really matter to me, but I do believe that it needs to mesh well with the character or flow organically with the narrative of the comic, and I think it does that well with Chuck Worthy, who as part of Hydra was trying to gentrify, even using Miss Marvel's image for their marketing, which affected people's reception of her. Then when he tried running for mayor via gerrymandering, which is where it definitely gets political, since that issue was about voting. I could see if people were to say that it was kind of a political agenda because it came out around the time of the presidential election. However, rather than telling you who to vote for, it was just explaining how to vote, so I think it went pretty neutral about it. Then when him and Lockdown also enforced local superhero legislation, so it does get political and topical at some points, but I think it balances it fairly well, as it still feels like Kamala is living life, growing up, still retaining its fun, light-hearted nature. I remember seeing a comment somewhere about this, which it said that having politics in comics is like having salt or pepper on food, where you don't want too much or too little, just the right amount to where it just feels right with whatever food, or in this case, the character / comic. And it's not even used to have Kamala talk about her own personal politics, rather just getting put into those situations. Like I mentioned before, I'm apolitical, but I don't ever feel like it tries to tell me how I should think. The politics is just there. So while I do think her comic is still going strong, I don't think it was exactly as tightly written as her first run because I noticed a few inconsistencies, like with Nakia. While I'm glad she's being utilized more, but during the first bout against Chuck, she was shown to be against Miss Marvel, but then when the voting happened, she was suddenly on her side, and there was nothing that I can recall of where they made up. I should also mention her design, which I like the simpleness of her costume, even the alternative one when she was in Pakistan. G. Willow Wilson does such a great job of it that I honestly can't imagine someone else taking over the character. It's like she's Miss Marvel. I mean, that day will eventually come where they'll have to change writers, so I'm curious as how that will pan out. Speaking of which, as far as other writers doing whatever they can with her on other titles, I am definitely not a fan of how Mark Waid writes her. Like I mentioned earlier with the Avengers run, Kamala feels more generic, a bit more serious, and not as loose and fun as herself in her own comics. In Champions, it's even worse because it's like he takes the fun, light-hearted, quirky, and nerdy nature from the character and makes her a bit more serious, dramatic, and I guess even more political than how she actually is. She feels too generic as well. Also, he made her a bit hypocritical because in all new or different Avengers, apparently she doesn't like property and such getting destroyed, yet she smashes down doors multiple times in her own comic. I'm sorry, I'm sure Mark Waid is a nice guy, but he just doesn't do a great job writing Kamala Khan. I feel like Bendis, with what we've seen of her in Miles' current run, shows more of that compassionate, friendly, and nerdy aspect of her character better than Waid does. So that's pretty much my main thoughts on her. Also, she's comic waifu. Okay, I just thought of this right now, but I'd also like to speculate on how I think these new characters could work within the MCU if they were to do a hypothetical phase 4 with them. So with Miles Morales, I honestly don't see him working. And the main reason why is that Tom Holland's Spider-Man already shares multiple elements of Miles' character within him, which I've already mentioned in my Spider-Man Homecoming review. So if they do introduce him, it would give the mainstream audience the impression that he's too similar to Peter Parker, especially since Peter already has Miles' best friend, which, let's be honest, Ned Leeds is basically Genki Lee in disguise. And people will be like, oh, why does Miles have a comical, nerdy, chubby Asian best friend like Peter does? It'd essentially be more of the same. Now, as for Kamala Khan, I could definitely see her working. With Carol Danvers in the MCU established as Captain Marvel, I'm not sure if she started out as Miss Marvel in the context of the MCU, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but based on what I know, it's apparently set in the 90s, or she's been around since the 90s at least, and the Skrulls are going to be the main enemies. Not sure if it will delve into the Kree-Skrull War. Anyway, in the film, I could see them maybe giving like a cameo / reference to Kamala Khan being one of the people Carol saves, interacts with her, establish that she's a huge fan of hers, and bam, Kamala would be set up. So if they were to make a film for her, I could definitely see them doing the Generations Y art, and Carol could come in and interact with her, maybe drop some exposition on her inhuman lineage to explain how she got her powers, assuming if they do delve into the Kree-Skrull War in the Captain Marvel film, and assuming that Carol started out as Miss Marvel, so they could still keep the reason Kamala chose to be Miss Marvel in the first place. So I could see it working. Not sure how her powers would look in live action, maybe similar to how Mr. Fantastic's powers work in the Fantastic Four films, and if she changes her size, well, they have experience with Ant-Man. Not sure if they will retain the yellow glow / tint they usually do in her comic, which I really like, although they don't really do it in most of the other titles she's in. I don't know what actors or directors would be casted or what. I don't mind as long as they pick the right people that would get her right, although I would personally prefer a cartoon over a live action film for Kamala since I think it would suit her better. It's all speculation at the end of the day. Wow, this video turned out longer than I've expected. Probably should have put a spoiler warning as well. So tell me, what are your thoughts on these two characters? If you've enjoyed me rambling like a madman, then you can suggest some other ideas you'd like me to give my thoughts on in the comment section below. Also, give it a like and subscribe for more. You can follow me on Google Plus and Twitter, links will be in the description below, and thanks for watching all the way through.